Hey everybody, welcome back to Cityscape Brewing. I'm Dennis Fields. Today, it's chilly. It's getting to be winter time, and we're starting to think of winter and cold month beers. And so today, we're gonna be doing something a little bit different to help you guys kind of hone in your beer brewing skills. We're gonna be doing a clone of Sierra Nevada's Celebration IPA. And this is a great winter beer. If you still like the hoppy IPAs or the pale ales, which I did a survey, a lot of you guys said your go-tos are those pale ales and IPAs. Mine too. My first beer at a brewery when I show up is probably gonna be that. Now I'll branch out, I'll get flights of other things, but it's always gonna be that pale ale or IPA probably first most of the time. And Sierra Nevada knocks them out of the park most of the time. So I've put together a clone, which I think is fairly close to the real thing. Sierra Nevada does have two of their beer recipes right on their website. They have their standard Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, and then they have Torpedo IPA. And so I kind of looked at their recipes for that and understand how they like to use their ingredients. They also have a lot of clone recipes that they put on different websites, on Brewer's Friend, and some of them come fairly close. And so when you start looking at some of the clones, I kind of adjusted some of them, but it says right on their website that they use Centennial, Chinoook, and Cascade hops. So we have those here. We're gonna be using those in the recipe. And they also use a lot of two-row. They'll use 60L, and then I threw in some Carapils also to really kind of balance out this beer. It is like a winter IPA pale ale, so it's going to have that darker color, malt color to it, so that 60L should give it that. And then we're going to go ahead and really do a side-by-side, maybe in a different video, kind of comparing the two. So this isn't an exact clone, but it should be fairly close, and it should make a really great beer at the end of the day. We're going to be using US-05 dry ale yeast for this one, so no need to make a starter. You can pitch one packet right into this, no problem. And so we're going to go ahead, we're going to start getting our water ready and our water additions put in. It is 8:30 in the morning, so that's why I don't have a beer. I have a different style of brew, coffee, but we may be finishing with a beer after all. So with that, grab yourself a homebrew, hit that like and subscribe button, and stay tuned. Also, if you haven't checked out that Cityscape merch, go check it out. You can get a sweatshirt like this one, perfect for the fall season. Shirts, hats, mugs, water bottles, pint glasses, everything you got. Stickers too for your beer fridge, because you know you need one of those. So check out the shop right below this video or in the channel's store page. It's a great way to support the channel. Thanks. All right, now that we got our water heated up, it's time to get our water additions measured out, our grains milled. Right now, our grain temperature is about 68 degrees. We're shooting for a mash temperature of 154. So to do that, we're gonna need a little bit warmer water, and you're gonna need to use one of those calculators like I use on Brewger.com. There's a mash and sparge infusion water calculator. You put in your grain temperature, which is just using a thermometer inside of your grains. You put in your amount of grains that you have, and it's gonna tell you all the water and temperatures that you're gonna need to hit in order to hit your mash temperature of 154. All right, our strike water is done heating up. I actually heated up to a little bit over what our target 166 was going to be, and this is really important to do in the winter months because your mash tun is going to be cold, and so it's going to take a couple of degrees away from that, and unless you account for that, it is going to kind of throw off your numbers. So I heated this up to about 167, 168. We can always stir it around or even add an ice cube if it's too hot. So we'll go ahead and transfer this water. I've already added our water additions in here, so we already have that. I'm gonna go ahead and get our grains all mixed up, and then we'll take a temperature reading. Get it all mixed up, we're gonna grab our temperature gauge while we're stirring this. We're gonna see where we're at. Again, trying to hit 154 for mash temperature. We are at 156, 155. So we're gonna put our thing on here right away and get that lid on, and we'll let it sit for 60 minutes. All right, so our mash is doing its thing at 154 degrees, 155 degrees. That's gonna sit there for an hour. At about 30 or 45 minutes, I do give it a quick stir around just to get it all mixed up, make sure there's no lumps or spots in there that I missed. We're gonna go ahead in the meantime and get our sparge water volume, which is 4.5 gallons. I've got our water additions already set here that we did before. And then I'm also gonna measure out our hops that we're gonna be needing for this. For our bittering hops, we're going to be using 1 ounce of Chinoook at 60 minutes, and then Cascade at 30, and then the rest is going Whirlpool, and we'll do some dry hopping as well. But we'll get our 1 ounce of each Chinoook and Cascade ready to go for the boil. All right, guys, it is ready to recirculate and to start our Vorlaufing process. Our mash is done. We're gonna give it a good stir around again, get all those grains mixed up, and then we're gonna start our Vorlaufing process. All right, to do this Vorlaufing process, I actually made what I call a recirculation tool, and this is going to help me when you do batch sparges. So I modified this since the original video, but if you haven't checked this out, basically I'm going to be able to fill up this pitcher, and it's going to splash down the wort without disturbing the grain bed inside of my mash tun. So I'm going to go ahead, I put this one up on the top like that, and I'll show you how that works in a minute. I take the second pitcher like this, and I start my Vorlauf process. So I'll open up the valve slowly to get the wort running through there. And then after it starts running clean, we're gonna do this about 4 or 5 times. After it starts running clean, we're gonna just put it right in our kettle, which is just off of the screen here on the bottom. But to start, I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna fill this pitcher. This is a gallon pitcher, so I only probably need to do this 3 or 4 times. But what we're gonna do is we're gonna run this through here. This is gonna help set the grain bed in the mash tun. And as this thing gets a little fuller, I'm going to pull it up and dump it in that other pitcher. And then there is, again, that tube with a screen that will help kind of disperse the wort so it's not making a direct hole right in our grain bed that's set inside of the mash tun. All right, so I lift this up. Once it gets above the level of wort in the mash tun, it should stop, you see that? So then we go ahead and I'm gonna take this pitcher and pour it into the other pitcher on top of here. And then that is slowly trickling out, not disturbing the grain bed inside. And that allows me, while that is still recirculating in there, to keep going with, pouring more wort in the pitcher down here, while letting that kind of slowly recirculate on the top. So rather than having a pump system, gravity's free. You might as well do it this way. All right, so our first runnings are done. We got about 2.8, 2.9 gallons, which Brugger, their calculator said we should get 2.8, so we're spot on. I'm gonna go ahead and dump our sparge water in here. I had that heated to about 190 degrees. I dump it in the secondary cooler. That brings it to probably about 180 because it'll lose a couple degrees sitting in there. But I want that to be hotter than 170 going in here. So I'm gonna go ahead, dump that in there, give it a good stir. We're gonna batch sparge rest for about 10 minutes or so just to get those other sugars pulled off of the grains. And then we're gonna do that same Vorlaufing process we just did to go to our final runnings. Make sure that your valve on your mash tun is closed, and then we just dump this whole guy right in here. Again, this is 4.5 gallons. I already have my water additions put in there. So we'll give this a good stir around, get that grain bed all mixed up again. So make sure you get it all the way around your screen on the bottom, or your false bottom, whatever you have. Give that a good mix up. All right, we're gonna let that set 10 minutes. All right, we're gonna go ahead and do our Vorlaufing process. So So we're gonna give this a good mix up again. We're gonna do the exact same thing we just did for our first runnings to get this nice and clear. Then the more you do this, the clearer your beer will be, you will find. So, and do this about 4 or 5 times till it runs clear. And then we will get our final runnings, which for Brugger had said should be about 7.2 gallons for my system about boiling off. So yours may be a little bit less. It depends on how vigorously your burner boils. All right, so we have our full 7.2 gallons in here. It is important to note, stop when you're full. If you have a little extra water or, excuse me, wort left to drain out of here, you're not doing yourselves any favors if you add it to your boil kettle, because you're not gonna either, A, you're not gonna be able to fit it in your fermenter, or it's just gonna be a longer boil process to get it down. You might also not hit your gravities as expected. So I go ahead and I stop it. I get a little sample because I like to test where I'm at to see if I'm hitting my efficiency like I thought I was. So you go ahead and grab a sample if you wanna do that. In addition to that, we've started the heat. We're gonna get this thing up to a boil. I'm gonna also add some FermCap S, which is going to help prevent boilovers as this gets up to the boil and as we add hops during our 60-minute addition, which I'm gonna be using my hop spider, and I'll put that on next. If you haven't seen my video on my DIY hop spider, go ahead and check that out and how I made that. So essentially what this is a PVC pipe with some longer bolts on there. You take a paint strainer bag like this one, and you put that up inside and around the top of this, and then you have a smaller big pipe clamp that you put over the top, and that kind of secures the bag in place. And you can either tighten that down, or if it's snug enough, just leave it like it is. When I'm using a lot of hops, like I'm going to use 4 ounces today through the Whirlpool, I'm gonna use this one. I will use my kind of metal mesh strainer one when I only have a couple, but that tends to get a little bit more gummed up and it's really hard to clean. This thing's actually fairly easy to clean, or I can just choose to throw it away. I buy these in bulk, and there's links in my video description on where I get these type of things, but I can get them in packs of 25 or 50. I use them all the time for fruit additions and other things, but mainly for hop and my hop spider for a boil. All right, we are just now getting up to a boil here. It's starting to get some more rapid bubbling and stuff going on. I usually give this a couple of minutes, or at least a little while anyway. Make sure I'm not gonna have any boilovers. Stirring it a little bit before I add the hops, just so you're not doing that right at the exact same time. But once that ramps up a little bit like that for a pretty rapid boil, I go ahead and I turn down the heat a little bit. And then I'll go ahead and add our 60-minute addition, which is our Chinoook hops. Give them one last snifferoni. I'm going in. And then I dump those in, and if they need a little encouragement going down there, I just lift up the bag, because when it's not, when there's nothing in it, there's no tension on the bag. I sometimes need to get some help getting down in there the first time, but they'll make her down in there. There we go. And then give it a good stir around. Watch our pot again. Our FermCap's doing its job keeping the bubbles down, but you still need to be watching it very closely when you first start boiling and when you first add those hops, because you still can get a boil over with FermCap. I've done it before, but not as often. It definitely breaks those bubbles up a lot, but I can smell them hops. That's good. And we'll be back in about 30 minutes to do our second hop addition. One quick tip that I like to do on my brew days, so it makes it easier during primary or secondary fermentation, especially if I'm doing like a hazy, which today we're not, but anytime I'm dry hopping, what I'll generally do is I'll take one of these small paint strainer bags like this, and I'll put it in sanitizer, and then I'll let it dry out. So this is completely clean and sanitized. Then I'm gonna take my 2 1-ounce additions that we're gonna be using for dry hopping, and I'm gonna put them inside of this bag, tied shut, then put it in this Ziploc bag and put it right in the freezer. That way, all I'm gonna do is, on the day that I brew, is pull this out of there. It's already in the hop sack, ready to go. It's been in the freezer to kind of preserve the hops, and you know, I can squeeze it out, get rid of as much oxygen as possible, and then I'm gonna go ahead and just put it right in my fermenter, and it's ready to go. So I don't have to do anything later on. So go ahead, pour these things right in here. It also helps because I use a vacuum sealer for my hops, so I don't have to reopen the hop bag again. I can, after my brew day, I can vacuum seal them back up, make sure they're all purged of oxygen and preserved better in my freezer. But then I have these things already pulled out and ready to go to, so I don't have to cut those open again and do all that. So that's a benefit of buying in bulk a little bit, where you can preserve your hops and keep them on hand. I do that for a lot of hops that I use all the time. Centennial, Cascade, you know, you name it, I have some of those on hand all the time. Go ahead, I get this thing tied up into a knot, stick it right in here, ziplock it, and then squeeze this down as much as you can of air. It doesn't have to be perfect, but air is bad for hops. So we go ahead, we get that vacuum pack down as much as we can by just squeezing it, throw this right in the freezer, and it's ready to go when we need a dry hop. All right, we have hit the 30-minute mark, so we are throwing in our Cascade. This is 1 ounce again at 30 minutes. Give her a last sniff. And there she goes. Like to lift that up a few times too once it gets in there, get all them oils out. Make sure all the hops fell through in there, and they did. And then stir it around real good. Move that bag around, get all them oils out of there. All right, if you haven't already, go ahead and get your carboy sanitized, get your transferring equipment, anything you need, hoses, airlocks, stuff like that. Get that all sanitized, ready to go. In about 15 minutes to the end of the boil, I'm gonna add a Vorlauf tablet that helps with clarity, just like adding Irish moss, and that'll help with the clarity of your beer at the end of the day. So I'm gonna go ahead and add that here shortly. Then we'll get on to the Whirlpool process, where we generally cool it down to about 170. We try to hold it at that temperature for about 10 minutes while we add our last Whirlpool hops. If you were using a different system, you could just kind of recirculate, keep that temperature. But what I like to do is generally get it down to about 180 or so degrees, pull out my wort chiller, throw in the hops, put the lid on the top, and kind of let it sit with those hops in there, pull out those oils. Then we'll finish cooling that down to pitching temperature and transfer to our carboy and pitch our yeast. All right, we're about 15 minutes to the end of the boil. Vorlauf tablet. Looks like this one. It says crush it up, but you really don't need to. This dissolves very, very quickly, so I just go ahead and throw it in. And then give her a good stir up. All right, our brew is done. I brought it out here. We're gonna start our wort chiller. We're just cooling this down to about like 190, 185. And then we're gonna put our hops in. And that's gonna cool it down a little bit more too. What I do with my hop splitter is I put it right in the middle of my wort chiller, like that, and I kind of rock it back and forth a little bit. It does not take long, especially in the cool winter months. You know, you can see it steaming out here. It's a little chilly out today. So we're gonna go ahead and get this down to about 190, and it's dropping like crazy right now. So then I'm gonna put the wort chiller back into my igloo cooler here and add our hops. It's not gonna take long for this to cool down. And I want it to sit at about between 170 and 180 degrees for the hop stand. But you'd be surprised how fast it chills off when I put a couple of ounces of hops in there. So it's about 190 right now. I'm gonna go ahead and shut that off. That's how quick it is with this wort chiller. Your wort chiller may take a little bit longer. But I'm gonna go ahead and get this guy in there. Now I'm gonna grab my hops. We have an ounce of Cascade and Centennial. I'm gonna put those in there carefully. And then lift up this hop sack a little bit just to get it really moving around in there. And then I'm gonna put the lid over the top of this. And I'm gonna sanitize it first because I wanna make sure that nothing's getting in there. So I'm gonna spray some sanitizer on the lid. Throw that on the top, and then this is going to be what we call our kind of our Whirlpool hop stand. It's already under 180 degrees. It'll continually cool, but I'm going to do this for about 10 minutes. Once it hits about 10 minutes, then we're going to go ahead and cool the whole thing down to pitching temps. Okay, so it's been 10 minutes. We're going to go ahead and get the rest of this thing cooled down. So we'll set our lid off to the side. It is still at like 185, 105, almost 170, I guess. So it stayed above 170, which is what we were going for the whole time. I'm gonna let this drain one more time, but I'm gonna also get our wort chiller back in there. Don't worry about the wort chiller being sitting here unless it got full of something. It should be well sanitized, and it's still hot enough where the beer is still over 150 degrees. So you shouldn't have to worry about it. But if you want to, you can always spray it down with sanitizer or something like that. I don't really generally worry about it. So then we'll want to just chill like normal, rocking this thing back and forth until it gets close to or at pitching temperature, which for this beer is going to be about 67, 68 degrees. Or let your fermentation chamber cool it down the rest of the way if it's summer months or something, or it's warmer where you're at, where you're not going to be able to get it down that cold. All right, we are all done cooling off. I've got everything sanitized here. I've got my carboy bung airlock. I've got this hose that I'm going to use also to get it into my carboy, and my screen, which is kind of twofold. I use the screen to help aerate the beer and also catch any particle hops or something like that that came out of my hop spider. So I'm going to go ahead and get this started. It is under 80 degrees. One thing that I like to do for when I'm using packets of dry yeast is actually keep the wort a little bit warmer, so not quite get it down to 68. I could have let this run and get down into the mid 70s or so before or low 70s, excuse me, before I transferred this, and then it would have cooled the rest of the way down in my carboy and other things. But with dry yeast, to rehydrate, if you're going to do that, you're going to put it in 90 degree water anyway. And so a lot of times what I'll do is I will just put it right into my wort, sprinkle it right in my wort, which is what I do most of the time with dry yeast. But I will put it in there when it's a little bit warmer to kind of give it a little head start, if you will, right? So it's under 80, that's all I'm really shooting for. So if it's at 75 degrees when I'm pitching my yeast, especially the dry yeast, that's perfect. It's gonna give it a kind of a warmed up, like you would add yeast to bread or anything else, a little bit of a head start in replicating. And then by the time it actually starts fermenting, you will have it down to pitching temps. So it's not too far away, so it won't create any off flavors. But you can tell when I'm transferring this from the kettle that it's really aerating the beer. I mean, you can see all the foam and stuff that's on there. I just tilt it, get every last drop of this stuff in here. And then I'm gonna go ahead and pitch my yeast right away once I get this thing in my fermentation chamber. But before we do that, make sure you get a hydrometer reading. Grab the sample here, and that's all we need. All right, we have cooled it down. It is now in probably lower 70s-ish, according to my Inkbird, which is reading from the side of the carboy, so it's not quite, it might be a little warmer still inside. But that's okay, we're gonna go ahead and pitch this. Sprinkle that all on top of the top. Essentially letting that kind of rehydrate on the top in that warmer wort. And then I'm gonna put a lid on here and my carboy, or my airlock, and then I'm gonna come back in about 10 minutes or so, kind of give it a good shake around. All right, let's take our starting gravity and see where we're at. So we're gonna put a little bit of this on here. Close the frame. Our app says, or brewer's friend said we should be at about 1065. And we are right at about 1066, so that's about perfect. So in about 7 days after fermentation wraps up, I'm gonna dry hop this again with the hops that we already put in our freezer. That's gonna be an ounce of Cascade and Centennial. We're gonna let that sit for 7 days. I generally do that in a secondary, and then we're gonna package our beer. I'm gonna keg that, and I'll be back in the future to do a brew day video on that to see a side-by-side comparison of how we did compared to the real Celebration IPA and our clone IPA. Thanks for watching. Hit that like and subscribe button, and cheers. Thanks for watching my video. I really do appreciate it. Another couple ways that you can help support the channel is by hitting that like and subscribe button. You can also check out the merchandise in our store. I have other shirts. We got glassware, we got stickers, hats, sweatshirts, etc. Go check it out. Also, hit that video here. You know you want to.